You know the experience I am about to describe, for you have lived it 1,000 times. You face a task you know you should perform. Every rational consideration supports immediate action, yet you do not act. You wait for motivation, for the proper mood, for circumstances to arrange themselves more favorably. And whilst you wait, you suffer the peculiar torment of the man who knows what he ought to do and cannot bring himself to do it. This is the prison in which most men spend their lives. I tell you plainly, the motivation you await will never arrive. It cannot arrive, for motivation is not the precondition of action but its consequence. You have been waiting for something that stands behind you, not ahead. You have been seeking entrance through a door that opens only from the other side. This is not mere philosophy. This is the practical science of human flourishing, refined in the crucible of real endeavor. I have tested these principles against the unforgiving demands of war, of statecraft, of the daily discipline required to produce 1,000,000 words of prose whilst leading a nation through existential crisis. What I discovered can be yours, but you must be willing to have everything you believe about discipline overturned. I have lived long enough to witness a peculiar truth that most men never discover, and those who do discover it rarely discover it in time to profit from the knowledge. It is this: the men who have accomplished the most consistently report the deepest satisfaction, whilst those who have accomplished least report the greatest misery. This is not coincidence. This is causation. The world labors under a monstrous misconception. Men believe that we work hard so that we might later enjoy ease. That effort is the price we pay for subsequent comfort, the bitter medicine that purchases future pleasure. They are catastrophically, ruinously wrong. The truth is precisely opposite. Ease pursued directly produces emptiness. Effort embraced produces fulfillment. Consider this paradox carefully, for upon your understanding of it depends everything that follows. At Sandhurst, in the year of my military training, I knew 2 young men of approximately equal promise. The first had inherited a considerable fortune from an uncle in trade. The second had inherited nothing but his name and his ambitions. The wealthy young man, freed from the necessity of effort, devoted himself to the consumption of his inheritance. He pursued pleasure as his primary occupation. The poor young man, compelled by circumstance, devoted himself to military service with such determination that his superiors took note of his capabilities. I encountered them both again 30 years hence, and the contrast could not have been more stark. The wealthy idler had become a hollow shell of a man, moving from spa to spa across the continent in search of a contentment that perpetually eluded him. His eyes held that peculiar vacancy I have observed in men who have everything and find it worth nothing. The soldier, now a colonel with modest means and considerable responsibilities, radiated a vitality and satisfaction that no fortune could purchase. He spoke of his work, his men, his campaigns, with an enthusiasm that made me rather envious, despite my own considerable accomplishments. Here, then, is the paradox in its clearest form. The man who avoided difficulty found misery, whilst the man who embraced difficulty found satisfaction. But why? The conventional wisdom holds that comfort is the goal of human striving, that we endure present hardship to purchase future ease. But observe what actually occurs when men achieve this supposed goal. The retired merchant who has finally escaped the demands of commerce does not bloom into happiness, he withers into boredom. The heir who receives without earning cannot enjoy what the earner found inexhaustibly satisfying. Comfort, pursued as a primary aim, produces not comfort but its opposite, a restless dissatisfaction that grows more acute with each indulgence. I call this the comfort trap, and it has destroyed more promising lives than war or disease. The man who makes comfort his object becomes progressively less capable of finding it, for the organism that ceases to be challenged ceases to flourish. The muscles that are not used atrophy. The mind that is not exercised grows dull, and the spirit that avoids difficulty becomes incapable of satisfaction. Now, here is the peculiar thing. Effort does not merely produce accomplishment. Effort produces energy. The man who demands much of himself in the morning arrives at evening invigorated. The man who demands nothing arrives exhausted by his own emptiness. This seems paradoxical until you understand the mechanism. The human organism requires purpose as surely as it requires food. Give a man purpose, and his energies multiply to meet the demand. Deprive him of purpose, and his energies dissipate into restlessness and despair. I have commanded fleets and armies, led a nation through its darkest hour, written more books than most men read in a lifetime, painted hundreds of canvases, and laid countless bricks at Chartwell with my own hands. Never once, not once in all my years, have I accomplished anything of value whilst waiting for the mood to strike. The mood is a fickle mistress who arrives only after you have begun without her. What does this mean for you, the reader of these pages? It means that every choice you face is a choice between paths to satisfaction and paths to emptiness, however the feelings of the moment may suggest otherwise. When you notice the impulse to avoid difficulty, recognize it as the same impulse that led my wealthy acquaintance from Sandhurst to his miserable peregrinations across Europe. The voice that counsels ease is not your friend. It is the voice of the comfort trap, calling you toward the very emptiness you seek to escape. Consider the choices before you this very evening. You may select diversion, the wireless program, the idle conversation, the comfortable chair, and the passing hours. Or you may select demand, the correspondence requiring attention, the skill requiring development, the project requiring advancement. The first path feels pleasant in anticipation and empty in execution. The second path feels onerous in anticipation and satisfying in execution. I challenge you to test this principle against your own experience. For 7 consecutive evenings, when the hour arrives at which you typically seek diversion, select instead a task you have been avoiding. Note in writing, before you begin, what you anticipate experiencing. Then note, after you have finished, what you actually experienced. This record will provide you with personal evidence of the paradox, evidence that no argument of mine could match in persuasive power. The primary error men make when confronting this truth is believing their own case to be exceptional. Perhaps they say, others may flourish through effort, but my particular constitution requires ease. This is universal self-deception. Every man who has ever lived has told himself some version of this lie. The secondary error is interpreting initial resistance as evidence of wrong choice. When you begin the demanding task and feel the pull toward diversion, you may conclude that you have chosen wrongly. You have not. Resistance is the guardian at the gate of every worthy endeavor. Its presence confirms rather than refutes your direction. After absorbing this chapter, you see through the illusion that has governed your choices. You recognize that your pursuit of ease has been self-sabotage disguised as self-care. A burden is lifted. You need no longer feel guilty about your dissatisfaction, for you now understand its source, and a power is gained. You possess the key insight that transforms your relationship with every future choice. But a question remains. Having recognized that effort produces satisfaction, whilst ease produces emptiness, you hunger to understand the mechanism. Why does this paradox hold? What operates beneath the surface of human psychology to produce these counterintuitive results? The next chapter reveals the hidden machinery. There is a myth that has paralyzed more men than any tyrant's decree, destroyed more promising careers than any economic catastrophe, and condemned more capable souls to lives of mediocrity than any injustice of birth or circumstance. It is the belief that one must feel motivated before one can act. This belief seems so obviously true that most men never think to question it. Of course, you must feel like doing something before you do it. Of course, motivation precedes action. Of course, the desire to work must exist before work can begin. But I tell you plainly, this is precisely backwards. Motivation is the product of action, not its precondition. We do not feel energetic and therefore exercise. We exercise and thereby feel energetic. We do not feel inspired and therefore write. We write and thereby feel inspired. The truth is the exact reverse of what common sense suggests. During my years in the political wilderness, when I was cast out from power and left to contemplate what I believed to be the ruin of my career, I undertook to write a comprehensive history of the English-speaking peoples. This was no modest pamphlet, but a work of more than 1,000,000 words, requiring years of sustained effort and research that would have daunted any university scholar. Had I waited for the motivation to write, I should still be waiting. Instead, I established the discipline of writing each morning regardless of inclination. Whether I felt inspired or empty, whether the words came easily or with the resistance of stone, I faced my papers at the appointed hour and I wrote. And here is what I discovered. To my considerable surprise, the motivation arrived approximately 20 minutes after I had begun. Never before. The resistance that preceded the work dissolved into engagement once the work commenced. Morning after morning, year after year, the same pattern repeated itself. Initial reluctance gave way to absorption, but only after I had ignored the reluctance and begun regardless. This observation led me to what I call the 20-minute threshold. In nearly every endeavor requiring sustained effort, the resistance that precedes action dissolves within 20 minutes of commencement. The brain, it seems, requires this period to shift from its anticipatory mode, which magnifies difficulty and manufactures objections, to its engaged mode, which finds solutions and generates momentum. One need only survive 20 minutes to find oneself on the other side. Think of it this way. What we call motivation is largely a retrospective interpretation of action already in progress. The body begins, the brain observes the beginning, and then, and only then, does the brain assign meaning and generate the feeling we call desire. But the desire follows the doing. It does not precede it. The man who waits to feel ready before acting is trapped in a logical impossibility. Readiness is produced by action. Therefore, waiting for readiness is waiting for what can only arrive after you have stopped waiting. He stands at the threshold indefinitely, awaiting a feeling that stands behind him, not ahead. He is like a man who refuses to enter a room until he can see what lies within, not realizing that the room illuminates only after entry. I have observed this trap claiming victims in every domain of human endeavor. The young writer who waits for inspiration finds that inspiration never comes, whilst his colleague who writes daily regardless of feeling finds inspiration arriving with remarkable regularity, always after the work has begun, never before. The officer who waits to feel brave before leading his men into action waits forever, whilst the officer who leads despite his fear discovers courage flowing into him from the very act of leading. Now, consider the implications of this principle. Action generates momentum, inaction generates inertia. Each small action makes the next action easier. Each postponement makes the next postponement more likely. The direction compounds. The man who acts today finds acting tomorrow slightly easier. The man who postpones today finds postponing tomorrow slightly easier. And so the gap widens between those who understand this mechanism and those who remain trapped by the myth of prior motivation. Tomorrow morning, when you face a task you have been avoiding, I counsel you to apply this principle directly. Do not pause to assess your motivation. Do not wait for the proper mood. Simply begin with the explicit understanding that motivation will arrive after approximately 20 minutes, not before. When the voice within protests that you are not ready, recognize this voice as the voice of the trap that has held you prisoner. Receive its report as you would receive a weather report. interesting perhaps, but not determinative of your course. You do not cancel a military operation because the morning is gray. You do not abandon your duties because your mood is poor. Why then would you postpone necessary action because motivation has not yet arrived? Action first, feeling second. Begin writing the letter, begin the exercise, begin the study. Do not wait for the engagement you seek. Go and find it through the act of beginning. The most destructive error men make in applying this principle is abandoning an activity after 5 or 10 minutes because motivation has not yet appeared. They stop precisely when breakthrough approaches, never knowing that had they persisted merely 10 minutes longer, the entire experience would have transformed. The second error is concluding that the absence of initial motivation indicates the wrong choice of activity. It indicates nothing of the kind. Initial resistance accompanies right choices as frequently as wrong ones. The presence of resistance is not intelligence about the wisdom of your undertaking. It is simply the nature of beginnings. What liberation awaits the man who grasps this truth? He is freed from waiting. He understands that the motivation he has been waiting for him. On the far side of action he has been postponing. He can now recognize the voice that counsels delay as a deceiver rather than a guide. The paralysis of indecision loses its power, for he knows that motion itself is the medicine. But you may reasonably ask, why does this mechanism exist? What is happening within the architecture of the brain that explains this reversal of common understanding? The next chapter reveals the machinery that makes transformation possible, and in that revelation you will find the master key to becoming whatever you choose to become. We arrive now at the mechanism that underlies all transformation, the hidden machinery that explains the paradoxes we have examined thus far. It is this: the brain is not a fixed instrument with permanent preferences, but a malleable organ that reshapes itself according to use. This is not poetry or metaphor. This is the observable mechanics of human neurology, as demonstrable as any principle of physics. Every action you take sends a signal to your brain about what matters, what deserves attention, what warrants the neurological resources that produce engagement and satisfaction. And the brain, being an obedient servant to habitual command, what this means, and I urge you to consider this carefully, is that what you do today literally shapes what you will want tomorrow. You are not discovering your nature through introspection. You are creating your nature through action. The man who reads daily builds a brain that desires reading. The man who exercises daily builds a brain that desires exercise. The man who avoids difficulty daily builds a brain that desires avoidance. We become disposed to do what we have done. Consider the young subaltern posted to India in the latter years of the last century. He arrives despising the climate, resenting the isolation, dreading the endless drill and the tedious routine of garrison life. Every morning feels like punishment. Every duty feels like imposition. He counts the days until his return to England, as a prisoner counts the days until release. Now observe this same young officer 6 months hence. The same climate, the same isolation, the same duties, yet something has fundamentally changed. The activities that produced misery now produce satisfaction. He finds himself anticipating the morning drill, rather than dreading it. He takes pride in the efficiency of his men, satisfaction in the mastery of his duties, pleasure in the camaraderie of the mess. His circumstances have not changed. His brain has. Through repeated action, his neural architecture has reorganized itself to find meaning in what previously seemed meaningless. I witnessed this transformation countless times among officers who arrived at their postings dreading them and departed reluctant to leave. The brain had built new structures through the mechanism of use, structures that transformed suffering into satisfaction. I call this the signal principle. Every time you perform an action, you send a signal to your brain that this action matters. The brain responds by building neural pathways. allocating attention, and eventually generating the feelings of engagement and satisfaction that accompany activities deemed important. You are, through your actions, teaching your brain what to value. This is power, genuine power, over your own destiny. You are not a prisoner of your current inclinations. You are the architect of your future dispositions. The question, "What am I naturally suited for?" gives way to the more powerful question, "What do I choose to become suited for?" But this mechanism carries a warning as well as a promise. The brain's malleability is greatest in the early stages of any new discipline, when patterns are being established. The habits formed in the first weeks set the trajectory for years. This is both opportunity and caution. The man who establishes a discipline correctly in its early stages builds a foundation for lasting transformation. The man who establishes poor patterns in those crucial early weeks may struggle against his own neural architecture indefinitely. Small daily actions produce neural changes that accumulate over time. This is the compound effect of action. The difference between the disciplined man and the undisciplined man is not one dramatic choice, but thousands of small choices, each reinforcing the pattern that preceded it. The disciplined man did not become disciplined through a single heroic act of will. He became disciplined through countless small acts of will, each one building upon the last until discipline became his nature rather than his struggle. What does this mean for your practical conduct? It means that every choice you make today is simultaneously a vote for who you will become tomorrow. When you choose the difficult path, you are not merely accomplishing a task, you are building a brain that will find difficult paths increasingly natural. When you avoid a challenge, you are not merely failing to accomplish a task, you are building a brain that will find avoidance increasingly automatic. Select one discipline you wish to establish. Not several, but one. Understand that you are not merely performing an action, but constructing a neural architecture. The first weeks are not mere repetition. They are investment in future capacity. Commit to performing this discipline for 21 consecutive days without exception, understanding that you are literally building new pathways in your brain. After 21 days, assess how your felt relationship with this activity has changed. You will likely discover that what once required conscious effort has begun to feel natural. What once provoked resistance now provokes merely neutrality, or perhaps the first stirrings of positive anticipation. This is the evidence of neural reorganization, evidence that you are becoming what you repeatedly do. The fundamental error men make in applying this principle is treating the brain's current preferences as fixed and permanent. Because they currently dislike an activity, they conclude they will always dislike it. This misunderstands the mechanism entirely. Current preferences are simply the accumulated result of past actions. Change the actions, and given sufficient time, the preferences must follow. The second error is impatience. Men expect neural reorganization to occur in days when it requires weeks, in weeks when it requires months. The brain does not rebuild overnight. Demanding immediate results sabotages the very process you seek to initiate. You must be patient with the machinery of transformation, trusting that it operates according to reliable laws even when evidence of its operation is not yet visible. After absorbing this chapter, you possess the master key to self-transformation. You understand that you are not a prisoner of your current inclinations, but an architect of your future dispositions. The question, "What am I naturally suited for?" has lost its tyrannical power. In its place stands the liberating question, "What do I choose to become suited for?" Agency replaces passivity. Creation replaces discovery. You are the sculptor of your own brain. But the practical question now demands an answer. What is the specific principle that governs how you should act when you do not yet feel inclined toward the discipline you wish to embrace? The next chapter provides that answer through what I call the principle of antecedent action. We come now to the foundational law upon which all practical discipline rests. I have called it the principle of antecedent action, and I shall state it plainly. Feeling follows behavior as shadow follows substance. You must act before you feel like acting, and by acting you create the feelings you wished had preceded your action. This is not psychological trickery or mere technique. This is the actual mechanics of human neurology, as reliable as any law of the physical sciences. The person who waits to feel disciplined before acting disciplined waits forever, for the feeling of discipline is produced by disciplined action. The person who acts disciplined regardless of feeling becomes disciplined through the mechanism of action itself. I learned this principle through the hardest of teachers, necessity. When I was driven from office after the Dardanelles disaster, I faced what I believed to be the ruin of my career. Everything I had built, every position I had attained, every hope I had harbored for serving my country at the highest levels, the temptation to surrender to despondency was overwhelming. The black dog of depression which had stalked me since youth circled ever closer. Instead of surrendering, I forced myself to take up painting. Not because I felt artistic inclinations. I felt nothing of the kind. I took up painting precisely because I did not feel like doing anything, and painting was sufficiently demanding to occupy my mind, whilst sufficiently different from politics to offer respite from brooding. I made myself face the canvas each day regardless of mood. Some mornings I felt nothing but gray emptiness. Other mornings I felt active resistance, almost revulsion at the thought of taking up the brush. It mattered not. I painted. And here is what I discovered to my considerable and enduring astonishment. The very act of painting produced the engagement that should supposedly have preceded it. Within 20 minutes of touching brush to canvas, the resistance dissolved into absorption. The feelings I had been awaiting arrived, but only after I had begun acting as though they were already present. This principle saved my sanity and ultimately my career. The action I forced myself to take produced the feelings that should have motivated the action in the first place. The shadow followed the substance. Think of it this way. Feeling is to action what shadow is to object. You cannot have a shadow without first having an object to cast it. Attempting to generate the feeling of motivation without the action that produces it is like attempting to create a shadow without an object. You are chasing an impossibility. The action first protocol follows directly from this understanding. When facing any discipline, do not assess your readiness. Do not await the proper mood. Do not consult your feelings for permission to proceed. Simply begin immediately upon identifying the action required. The assessment of readiness is itself a form of delay disguised as prudence. It is the mind's attempt to postpone the very action that would resolve its doubts. The critical moment is always the moment of beginning. This is where all resistance concentrates, like enemy forces defending a crucial stronghold. Once the stronghold is taken, once beginning has occurred, momentum carries the action forward. Therefore, focus all effort on beginning rather than on completing. Mastery of beginnings is mastery of everything that follows. I counsel you to develop what I call mood independence, the capacity to act without consulting your moods, without awaiting their permission, without treating them as relevant data for your decisions. When the voice within reports that you do not feel like acting, receive this report as you would receive a weather report. Interesting perhaps, but not determinative of your course. You do not cancel your duties because the morning is gray. You do not abandon your principles because your mood is poor. Why then would you postpone necessary discipline because motivation has not yet arrived? Mood is weather. Action is navigation. The skilled navigator proceeds regardless of weather, adjusting his technique but not abandoning his destination. Tomorrow morning, select one task you have been avoiding and apply this principle directly. Do not pause to assess your state of readiness. Do not wait for the proper mood. Simply begin. with the explicit understanding that you are testing this principle against your own experience. Observe what occurs to your motivation and engagement over the following 20 minutes. I am confident you will discover what I discovered during those difficult months at Chartwell. The feelings you were awaiting have arrived, not because you waited, but because you acted. The shadow has appeared because you have provided the substance. For 1 week, I suggest you keep a log of actions taken despite absence of motivation. Note the time you began, your mood at commencement, and your mood 20 minutes later. By week's end, you will possess personal evidence of the principle's reliability, evidence far more compelling than any argument of mine could provide. The primary error men make in applying this principle is continuing to treat mood as a valid reason for inaction, even after intellectually accepting what I have told you. Understanding must translate to behavior, or understanding remains merely academic. You may nod along with these pages and then, tomorrow morning, find yourself waiting for motivation before beginning your work. The intellectual acceptance has not become behavioral change. You must convert knowledge into action. The secondary error is attempting to manufacture the feeling before the action, trying to psych yourself up, to generate enthusiasm through mental exercises, to talk yourself into wanting what you do not yet want. This is shadow chasing. It delays the very action that would resolve the problem. Simply act. The feeling will follow. After absorbing this chapter, you possess a technique of immediate practical value. You are no longer at the mercy of your moods. You need not wait for states that arrive only after the action they supposedly enable. You possess a reliable method for breaking through the barrier between intention and execution, a method that works regardless of your emotional state. But you may still wonder, how does this actually work within the architecture of the mind? What is happening when repeated action transforms resistance into desire? Does identity itself change, or merely behavior? The next chapter reveals the mechanics of identity formation through behavior, and in that revelation you will find the key to becoming whatever you choose to become. We arrive now at a truth that most men have precisely backwards. We do not do what we are. We become what we do. This distinction may seem subtle, but upon your understanding of it depends your capacity for genuine transformation. The common view holds that identity precedes action, that we must first be a certain kind of person before we can undertake certain kinds of action. We must be a writer before we can write, a disciplined person before we can practice discipline, a courageous soul before we can act with courage. But I tell you that this is exactly backwards. The person who performs disciplined actions becomes a disciplined person. The transformation occurs not in some mystical interior realm accessible only to meditation and introspection. It occurs in the observable world of repeated behavior that gradually reshapes the invisible structures of mind and character. I recall a young officer in my command who insisted, with considerable vehemence, that he was not the sort of person who could speak publicly. He avoided all occasions that required addressing groups. When duties required him to brief his subordinates, he would contrive to have written orders distributed instead. His conviction about his own nature was absolute. On my insistence, for I recognized his potential and saw this self-conception as the obstacle to its realization, he began delivering briefings to his platoon. The first was excruciating to witness. He stumbled over words, lost his place, and concluded so abruptly that his men seemed uncertain whether he had finished. But he continued. The second briefing was marginally better. The third better still. Within months he was briefing competently. Within a year he spoke with a skill that exceeded most of his peers. When I reminded him of his earlier protests, his absolute certainty that public speaking was not in his nature, he seemed genuinely puzzled. I have always been comfortable speaking, he said, having entirely forgotten his former self-conception. The behavior had not merely changed his capability. It had reconstructed his identity. He had become what he repeatedly did. This is the identity feedback loop in action. Each time you perform an action, you provide evidence to yourself about who you are. The brain collects this evidence and assembles it into a narrative, a story about your nature, your capabilities, your identity. Change the actions, and over time the narrative must change to accommodate the new evidence. The brain cannot indefinitely maintain a story that contradicts its daily experience. If you tell yourself you are undisciplined whilst acting with discipline every day, the story must eventually yield to the evidence. The brain will update its narrative to match the behavior it observes. This leads directly to what I call the behavior before belief principle. Do not wait to believe you are disciplined before acting with discipline. Such waiting will prove eternal. Act with discipline, and belief will follow as the brain accumulates evidence that contradicts the old self-conception. You do not need to change your beliefs about yourself directly. You need only change your behavior, and the beliefs will adjust accordingly. Consider how liberating this truth is. You need not be a certain kind of person before undertaking certain kinds of action. The actions themselves will make you into the person capable of performing them with increasing ease and eventually with genuine pleasure. You are not trapped by your current self-conception. You are free to construct a new self through the simple mechanism of changed behavior. Identity shifts not through dramatic gestures, but through the accumulation of small, consistent actions. Think of each small action as a vote for a particular identity. When you rise early despite wanting to sleep, you cast a vote for the identity of a disciplined person. When you write despite not feeling inspired, you cast a vote for the identity of a writer. When you exercise despite preferring comfort, you cast a vote for the identity of an active person. Sufficient votes determine the outcome of the election. No single vote is decisive. No single action transforms identity. But the accumulation of votes, the steady casting of ballots for the person you wish to become, eventually produces a majority that cannot be denied. The new identity emerges not from one heroic act, but from countless small acts, each one shifting the balance slightly until the scales have definitively tipped. Here is a phenomenon I have observed that confirms this principle. As new identity solidifies, the former identity becomes increasingly difficult to recall. The young officer I mentioned could not remember ever having feared public speaking, though his terror had been evident to all who witnessed his first attempts. The person you become has genuine difficulty believing they were ever the person you were. This forgetting is not a flaw, but a feature. It indicates complete integration of the new patterns into identity. When you can no longer recall your former limitations, when the new capability seems to have always been part of who you are, the transformation is complete. The votes have been counted. The election has been decided. What does this mean for your practical conduct? It means you should identify the aspects of your self-conception that limit you, the beliefs about what kind of person you are that prevent you from taking actions you wish to take. Do not attempt to change these beliefs directly through mental effort, through affirmation, through trying to convince yourself of a different story. This is inefficient and frequently ineffective. Instead, simply begin performing the actions that would be natural for a person without your particular limitation. Treat your current self-conception as outdated data awaiting replacement. With sufficient behavioral evidence, the belief must update to match the new reality. The cardinal error is waiting for identity to change before behavior changes. This is the trap. Identity changes only in response to behavior. If you wait for identity to change first, you wait forever, for you have placed the cart before the horse. The horse of behavior must pull the cart of identity. There is no other arrangement that works. The secondary error is attempting to change too many behaviors simultaneously. When you scatter your efforts across multiple fronts, you provide insufficient evidence in any single domain to trigger identity shift. The votes are divided among too many candidates. No one achieves a majority. Focus produces transformation. Scatter produces frustration. Choose one domain, pursue it with consistency, and allow the identity shift to occur before adding additional fronts. After absorbing this chapter, your relationship with self-conception fundamentally shifts. You recognize that identity is not discovered but constructed, not fixed but malleable, not a cage but a work in progress. The tyrannical question, "What kind of person am I?" loses its power. In its place stands the liberating question, "What kind of person do I choose to become through my actions?" This is genuine liberation, the freedom to author oneself, to write one's own story through the ink of daily behavior. But a question naturally arises. Must you forever force yourself against your inclinations? Is the disciplined life an endless struggle of will against desire, or does there come a point where duty and desire merge into one? The next chapter reveals the complete arc of transformation, from reluctant obedience to genuine appetite, and in that revelation you will find the hope that makes persistence possible. We have established that action precedes feeling, that identity follows behavior, and that the brain rebuilds itself according to use. But a question naturally arises, and it is a question that must be answered if you are to persist through the difficulties that lie ahead. Must I forever force myself against my inclinations? Is the disciplined life an endless struggle of will against desire, a permanent war within the self? I tell you plainly, it is not. What begins as duty, faithfully performed, transforms into genuine desire. This is not mere habituation, the dull acceptance of what cannot be avoided. This is actual transformation of the neurological structures that produce wanting. The activity you now force yourself to perform will, if you persist long enough, become the activity you genuinely wish to perform. Consider my relationship with painting. It began as a desperate measure against the black dog of depression during my political exile after the Dardanelles disaster. I did not take up the brush because I felt artistic inclinations. I felt nothing of the kind. I took up the brush because I needed occupation from my mind, distraction from the wreckage of my career, some activity demanding enough to prevent the endless rehearsal of failure and regret. The daily discipline of confronting the canvas was initially onerous. I did not enjoy the preparation of paints, the mixing of colors, the challenges of perspective and light. These were tasks to be endured, medicine for my condition rather than pleasure for my soul. Yet something changed as the weeks became months and the months became years. The duty transformed. I began to anticipate the studio with genuine eagerness. The very activity that had required force now drew me with magnetic attraction. The smell of turpentine, which had once signified obligation, came to signify delight. What was once medicine had become feast. The transformation from duty to desire was complete and irreversible. I painted for the remainder of my life, producing more than 500 canvases, finding in that activity one of the deepest and most reliable pleasures available to me. Had you told me, in those dark days of forced beginning, that I would one day eagerly sacrifice hours of leisure for the privilege of standing before a canvas, I should not have believed you. Here, then, is the arc of transformation, and I urge you to commit it to memory. First comes duty against resistance. The action feels forced because it is forced. You do not want to do what you are doing. You do it solely on the strength of decision. This stage is unpleasant, and there is no pretending otherwise. But it is temporary. Second comes capability through repetition. As you continue performing the action, you become more skilled at it. The clumsy brushstrokes give way to confident ones. The halting sentences give way to flowing paragraphs. Competence emerges from practice, and with competence comes a subtle shift in experience. Third comes satisfaction from capability. You begin to take pride in what you can do. The activity that once produced only frustration now produces moments of genuine accomplishment. You see the fruits of your persistence, and something in you responds with pleasure. Fourth comes desire from satisfaction. The pleasure you experience in the activity begins to create anticipation of that pleasure. You find yourself looking forward to what you once dreaded. The duty has transformed into desire, not through any trick of self-deception, but through the genuine reshaping of your neurological reward systems. This transformation cannot be rushed. Attempting to force desire prematurely leads only to frustration. One must be content with duty, whilst duty is required, trusting that desire will emerge on its own schedule. The man who demands to enjoy the activity immediately, before the transformation has had time to occur, sabotages the very process he seeks to accelerate. Now, here is a practical application of this understanding. When you find yourself in the early stages of a discipline, forcing yourself daily against resistance, remind yourself of the complete arc you are traveling. This is not your permanent condition, but your temporary passage. The discomfort you experience today is not a feature of the activity itself, but a feature of your current relationship with the activity, a relationship that is already changing through the very persistence that produces your discomfort. Observe any domain in which you already experience desire for disciplined activity. Perhaps you enjoy reading, or exercise, or some craft or skill. This was once duty. At some point in your history, you forced yourself to begin, continued despite resistance, developed capability, experienced satisfaction, and eventually arrived at genuine desire. The transformation you have already accomplished in one domain is evidence that you can accomplish it in others. The devastating error, and I have watched countless promising men make this error, is abandoning a discipline before transformation occurs. They remain perpetually in the stage of effortful resistance because they never persist long enough to reach the stage of emergent pleasure. They quit at the threshold of breakthrough, never knowing how close they stood to the transformation they sought. Many men have abandoned disciplines at the very moment when desire was about to replace duty. Had they persisted one more week, one more month, they would have discovered what I discovered with painting, that the activity they were forcing themselves to perform had become the activity they wished to perform, but they did not persist, and so they never knew. Patience, therefore, is not merely a virtue, but a tactical necessity. The transformation from duty to desire requires time. Time for the brain to reorganize, time for capability to develop, time for satisfaction to accumulate. You cannot compress this duration through intensity of effort. You can only wait, continuing to act, trusting the process. After absorbing this chapter, the early stages of discipline no longer appear as permanent sentences, but as temporary passages toward a destination worth reaching. Hope becomes rational rather than wishful. The mechanics are reliable, and transformation is guaranteed for those who persist. Your willingness to endure initial resistance increases dramatically when you understand that the reward is not mere tolerance but genuine desire. But what happens when the resistance does not yield, when you try and fail? When you fall short of your intentions, the next chapter addresses the valley of resistance that every traveler must cross. We come now to a truth that transforms the entire experience of difficulty. Resistance is not a sign of failure, but evidence of progress. This may seem paradoxical, even perverse. When you struggle against a discipline, when every fiber of your being protests against what you have determined to do, when the voice within clamors for abandonment, surely this indicates that something is wrong? Surely resistance signals that you have chosen poorly, that you are unsuited to this particular endeavor, that wisdom lies in retreat? I tell you that precisely the opposite is true. The brain does not surrender its established patterns without protest. The neural pathways you have built through years of habitual behavior do not yield gracefully to new patterns. They fight. And the very intensity of that fight indicates that genuine change is underway. If nothing were changing, there would be nothing to resist. Think of it this way. During the darkest days of the war, when German bombers appeared nightly over London and our cities burned, I observed that the intensity of enemy resistance corresponded directly to our proximity to targets of genuine importance. When our operations provoked little opposition, it typically meant we had chosen targets of little value. When opposition was fierce, we knew we had struck at something vital. I came to read resistance as intelligence. The greater the enemy's effort to stop us, the more important our mission. So it is with internal resistance to discipline. The fierceness of your internal opposition indicates the importance of what you are attempting. If the discipline you have undertaken provokes strong resistance, it is probably targeting something important, some pattern, some habit, some aspect of your character that has held you back. Weak opposition indicates weak impact. Fierce opposition indicates that you have struck at something that matters. Consider the implications of this principle. The activities that produce the greatest initial discomfort typically produce the greatest eventual benefit. Comfort in early stages often indicates insufficient challenge to trigger adaptation. The discipline that feels easy is probably not demanding enough to produce transformation. The discipline that feels impossible is precisely the discipline that, if persisted in, will produce the changes you seek. I call this the discomfort paradox. We naturally seek to minimize discomfort, but in the domain of personal transformation, discomfort is the marker of productive effort. The path of least resistance leads nowhere worth going. The path of maximum resistance leads to transformation. Now, resistance concentrates at thresholds. This is a practical observation you can use to navigate your own journey. The moments of greatest resistance are the moments of beginning, the points of deepening commitment, the transitions to new levels of demand. Each threshold concentrates the resistance. Once the threshold is crossed, resistance diminishes dramatically. I have observed this pattern countless times in military training, in political campaigns, in my own writing practice. The moments before beginning are terrible. The first minutes of the work are difficult, but once the threshold is crossed, once you have actually begun, once you have committed to this particular session of effort, the resistance falls away and engagement takes its place. Therefore, when you experience fierce internal resistance to a discipline, I counsel you to pause and reinterpret the sensation. Rather than asking, "Why is this so hard?" a question that leads nowhere useful, ask instead, "What must I be threatening that provokes such opposition?" Recognize that your old patterns are fighting for survival against the new patterns you are establishing. This is war, and in war there are casualties. The casualty you seek is your former self, the self that could not discipline itself, the self that surrendered to every impulse, the self that remained forever at the mercy of mood and circumstance. That self is fighting for its life. Let it lose. The fatal error, and it has destroyed more promising transformations than any other single mistake, is interpreting resistance as a signal to stop rather than a confirmation to continue. When the internal voice grows loudest in its protests, most men conclude that something is wrong and abandon their effort. They do precisely the opposite of what they should do. They retreat at the moment when advance would have produced breakthrough. The secondary error is judging progress by the presence or absence of resistance rather than by consistent action. The man who asks himself each morning, "Do I feel like doing this?" and interprets the answer as evidence of progress or failure, has fundamentally misunderstood the nature of transformation. Resistance is not the measure. Behavior is the measure. The only question that matters is, did I perform the discipline today? If the answer is yes, you have succeeded, regardless of how much resistance accompanied the performance. The third error is expecting resistance to diminish linearly. It does not. Resistance often intensifies before breakthrough, creating a false impression of worsening conditions precisely when improvement approaches. This is the darkest moment before dawn, and many men abandon their effort precisely here, never knowing that had they persisted through one more day, one more week, the resistance would have broken. After absorbing this chapter, your emotional relationship with difficulty fundamentally shifts. What once felt like punishment now feels like validation. The voice of resistance loses its authority because its message has been exposed as exactly backwards. Struggle becomes tolerable, even welcome, because it carries meaning. When you feel the fierce resistance tomorrow morning, when every part of you protests against your chosen discipline, you will know what that resistance signifies. It signifies that you are on the right path and that your enemy knows it. But you may reasonably ask, what are the specific stages of this journey from first resistance to final mastery? The next chapter provides the complete map. I shall now provide you with a complete map of transformation, a map I have derived from decades of observation, both of myself and of the countless men I have led, trained, and served alongside. This map identifies the 5 distinct stages through which every man passes on the journey from resistance to enjoyment. Know this map, and you can locate your current position, understand what lies ahead, and recognize the specific dangers that threaten you at your particular stage. I witnessed these stages unfold with perfect clarity in the training of military recruits, and I shall use that context to illuminate the progression. The raw soldier arrives at his regiment in stage 1, which I call mechanical obedience. Every demand feels onerous. Every order is resented. He does not want to rise at dawn, does not want to drill, does not want to clean his equipment or maintain his quarters, or submit to the endless demands of military discipline. He proceeds solely on the strength of external compulsion, the sergeant's command, the threat of punishment, the absence of any alternative. This stage is brutal. There is no pretending otherwise. Every action is a battle. The recruit fights himself as much as he fights the rigors of training. He performs his duties not because he wishes to, but because he must. Duration: typically 2 to 4 weeks of consistent practice. The danger of this stage is concluding that you are unsuited to the endeavor and abandoning the effort entirely. The recruit who quits in the first fortnight has failed the first test, and it is a test of persistence, not aptitude. Within weeks, if he persists, the soldier progresses to stage 2, grudging acceptance. The battle diminishes. He still does not want to do what he is doing, but the resistance no longer requires maximum effort to overcome. The morning alarm still provokes protest, but the protest is quieter. The drill is still tedious, but it is tediously familiar rather than tediously alien. Duration: typically 1 to 3 months. The danger of this stage is assuming you have arrived and ceasing to advance. The soldier who remains permanently in grudging acceptance has failed to progress to the stages where genuine satisfaction becomes possible. After months, stage 3 emerges: neutral competence. The discipline no longer torments the soldier. He performs his duties without suffering, but also without positive feeling. The mechanics have become automatic. The resistance has faded, but enthusiasm has not yet appeared. He is neither fighting his duties nor enjoying them. Duration: variable, and here many men remain indefinitely. This is the plateau of adequacy, and it is a dangerous place to rest. The danger of this stage is settling for adequacy rather than pressing toward mastery. The soldier who achieves neutral competence and stops there has accomplished something but has not accomplished what is possible. The fortunate ones reach stage 4, emergent pleasure. Satisfaction begins to accompany the discipline. The soldier anticipates training with something approaching enthusiasm. He takes pride in his capability, finds meaning in his duties, experiences genuine pleasure in the camaraderie and purpose of military life. Duration: typically develops over months of consistent practice at stage 3. The danger of this stage is underestimating how much further the journey extends. Emergent pleasure is not the destination, but the approach to the destination. And the finest soldiers attain Stage 5, integrated mastery. The discipline has become inseparable from identity. The soldier does not perform his duties, he is a soldier. The question of motivation does not arise, any more than one questions the motivation to breathe. Duty and identity have merged completely. This is the destination that makes all prior effort worthwhile. This progression is not unique to soldiers. It describes the arc of every discipline in every domain. Now here is the practical application. Locate your current position on this map for any discipline you are pursuing. Ask yourself honestly, what stage am I in? What evidence supports this assessment? What are the specific dangers that threaten me at this stage? Use this analysis to set realistic expectations. Moving from Stage 1 to Stage 2 is genuine progress, worthy of recognition, even though both stages involve some degree of resistance. Moving from Stage 3 to Stage 4 is a significant transition, even though Stage 3 felt like adequacy. Each advance is achievement, and each achievement strengthens the foundation for further advance. The common mistakes at each stage are predictable and therefore avoidable. At Stage 1, the error is abandoning effort because enjoyment has not yet materialized. You cannot expect enjoyment at Stage 1. It does not exist there. Persist regardless. At Stage 2, the error is ceasing advancement because resistance has decreased. The decrease of resistance is not the goal, it is merely a milestone on the way to the goal. At Stage 3, the error is accepting permanent residence on the plateau of adequacy. You have achieved tolerance, now press toward enthusiasm. At Stage 4, the error is believing transformation complete when deeper integration remains possible. Emergent pleasure is wonderful, but integrated mastery is better. At all stages, the error is expecting linear progress when the reality involves plateaus, apparent regressions, and sudden advances. The path winds. Sometimes it seems to descend when in fact it is preparing to ascend. Trust the general direction rather than the momentary gradient. After absorbing this chapter, you can navigate with confidence. The journey becomes comprehensible. The destination becomes imaginable. You know what to expect at each stage and can recognize the specific traps that threaten your particular position. This knowledge itself provides comfort. Others have traveled this path before you, and its terrain is known. But one question remains paramount. What is the primary obstacle that prevents men from traversing these stages successfully? The next chapter reveals impatience as the central enemy and teaches the art of outlasting it. The primary enemy of transformation is not difficulty, not resistance, not the magnitude of the change you seek. The primary enemy is impatience, the demand for immediate results, the inability to wait whilst the slow work of neural reorganization proceeds, the insistence that progress reveal itself according to your preferred schedule rather than its own. I learned this truth through the discipline of masonry. When I undertook to build the walls and gardens of Chartwell with my own hands, I discovered lessons that extended far beyond the construction of physical structures. Each brick required precise placement. Each row required patience to await the setting of the mortar before proceeding to the next. The work could not be rushed without ruining what had been built. The impatient bricklayer, rushing to see his wall rise, compromises the mortar. He stacks brick upon brick before each layer has properly cured, eager to witness the visible progress of his labor, and he produces a structure that collapses under its own weight, a wall that cannot bear the burden of its own construction because the foundation was never given time to solidify. The patient bricklayer understands that each layer must cure before the next is laid. He does not demand immediate results. He trusts the process, knowing that mortar requires time to harden, that rushing produces fragility, where patience produces strength. And he produces a wall that outlasts him by centuries, a structure built to endure because each element was given time to properly form. The brain is rebuilt the same way, brick by brick, layer by layer, with patience for the curing between. Just as mortar requires time to cure between layers, neural patterns require time to solidify between actions. Each day of disciplined practice lays another brick, but the structure only achieves strength when each layer is given time to set. Compressing this duration, demanding that transformation occur in days when it requires weeks, in weeks when it requires months, produces fragile patterns that collapse under pressure. Here, then, is the first principle of patience. Recognize that the demand for immediate results is itself a form of the self-indulgence that discipline must overcome. When you insist upon rapid transformation, when you grow frustrated at the pace of your own development, when you demand evidence of progress before the process has had time to produce that evidence, you are indulging the very impulse that discipline is meant to master. Mastering impatience is not separate from the discipline you seek. It is part of the discipline. The second principle concerns the focus of your attention. Rather than monitoring outcomes, which creates constant opportunities for impatient evaluation, monitor inputs. Count the days of consistent action rather than measuring progress. You control inputs directly and completely. Outcomes follow on their own schedule, according to their own mechanics. Ask yourself not, have I transformed, but did I perform today's discipline? The first question invites impatience. The second invites only honest reporting. If you perform today's discipline, you have done what can be done today. The transformation will follow, but on its schedule, not yours. I counsel you to set your expectations not for weeks, but for months and years. The men who achieve lasting transformation are those who commit to time frames that permit genuine restructuring. Short time frames produce short-lived changes. The man who expects to transform himself in 30 days may achieve temporary modification, but not the deep reorganization that produces permanent change. Commit to longer horizons. Commit to the practice itself rather than to the results of practice. Let the results accumulate gradually, like interest compounding in an account you check only annually. The checking changes nothing. Only the deposits matter. Here is the paradox of patience. Those who are patient achieve results faster than those who are impatient. The impatient man sabotages himself through premature evaluation and abandonment. He checks his progress daily, grows discouraged by the absence of visible change, and quits before transformation can occur. The patient man persists without checking, allows the process to work unobserved, and arrives at transformation whilst the impatient man is still starting over. When you notice impatience arising, the desire to assess whether transformation is occurring, the disappointment that results are not yet visible, recognize this as a test rather than a signal. You are being tested on patience, and failure on this test prevents success on all others. Redirect your attention from outcomes to inputs. Have I performed today's discipline? Yes. Then I have done what can be done today. I recommend that you remove measurement from your practice entirely for a defined period. For 30 days, or 60 if you can manage it, focus solely on consistent action without evaluation. Do not weigh yourself, do not assess your capability, do not ask whether you feel more inclined toward the activity. Simply perform the discipline each day and record that you have performed it. At the end of the defined period, evaluate. You will discover that progress has occurred, progress that would have been invisible to daily measurement, progress that might have discouraged you had you observed it in its early stages, progress that becomes undeniable only when viewed across sufficient duration. The central error is evaluating too frequently, thereby creating constant opportunities for discouragement. Daily evaluation invites daily disappointment, for transformation occurs too slowly to be visible from day to day. Weekly evaluation is better. Monthly evaluation is better still. The secondary error is setting time frames insufficient for genuine transformation, expecting in weeks what requires months. If you commit to a 3-week transformation program, you have committed to failure, for 3 weeks cannot produce what 3 months might. The third error is interpreting the absence of perceived progress as evidence of failure, when in fact progress occurs beneath the threshold of perception until it suddenly becomes undeniable. The wall does not appear to grow as each brick is laid. It suddenly appears as a wall when sufficient bricks have accumulated. After absorbing this chapter, you possess the capacity for patient persistence, the ability to continue without constant confirmation, to trust the process without perpetual verification, to focus on inputs whilst allowing outcomes to develop on their own schedule. This capacity is itself a form of mastery, and it transfers to every subsequent endeavor you will undertake. Having learned to persist with patience through the valley of resistance, you are ready to see how these principles integrate with the broader patterns of life. The next chapter reveals how discipline transforms not merely individual capabilities, but the entire structure of existence. We arrive now at a truth that transforms the entire significance of discipline. The capacity you build in one domain transfers to all others. The neural pathways developed through sustained discipline are not task-specific. They are general capacities, capacities for self-governance, for overriding impulse in service of intention, for persisting through resistance, for maintaining focus despite distraction. Build these capacities anywhere, and they become available everywhere. I observed this transfer of power throughout my own career, though I did not at first understand what I was observing. The disciplines required for military service, rising early regardless of inclination, enduring physical discomfort without complaint, maintaining composure under conditions that would unmake lesser men, executing orders with precision even when their purpose was unclear, these disciplines transferred directly to political life. The capacity to function under the pressures of campaign and battle prepared me for the pressures of parliamentary debate and ministerial responsibility. The disciplines required for writing, sitting daily before blank pages when inspiration was absent, persisting through the mental resistance that precedes all creative work, revising until excellence was achieved, rather than accepting the adequacy of first efforts, these disciplines transferred to diplomatic negotiations. The patience and precision required to craft a proper paragraph prepared me for the patience and precision required to craft a proper treaty. Each discipline strengthened not merely itself, but the general faculty of disciplined action. The capacity built in one arena became available in all arenas. Consider what this means for your own practice. You are not merely developing a particular skill when you establish a discipline. You are building the muscle of self-governance, a muscle that applies equally to every domain of your life. Your morning exercise routine is not merely training your body, it is training your capacity to override reluctance in service of intention. Your evening study practice is not merely accumulating knowledge, it is strengthening the neural architecture that makes all future disciplines easier to establish and maintain. This understanding transforms your approach to discipline. Each specific practice becomes investment in a general capacity. The benefits compound far beyond the original domain. I call this the capacity transfer principle, and it explains a phenomenon you may have observed in accomplished men and women. They tend to display discipline across multiple domains, not merely in the single domain where they first achieve recognition. The reason is not that they possess some unusual native endowment unavailable to ordinary mortals. The reason is that they have built transferable capacity through sustained discipline in one domain, and that capacity then flows naturally into other domains. Multiple disciplines reinforce each other, creating what I might call a virtuous spiral. The discipline of early rising supports the discipline of focused morning work. The discipline of focused morning work supports the discipline of evening study. The discipline of evening study supports the discipline of early rising, for the tired mind welcomes early sleep. Each discipline strengthens all disciplines. This is why the disciplined man often appears to achieve effortlessly what costs the undisciplined man constant struggle. The disciplined man has compounded his capacity through multiple reinforcing channels. He is not trying harder, he is working with accumulated momentum. Because capacity transfers, you may enter the system of discipline at any point. Do not ask which discipline is most important, as though you must identify the single correct door. Any door leads to all doors. Choose the discipline that seems most accessible, the discipline where your resistance is lowest, where conditions favor success, where you can most easily establish consistent practice. Use this accessible discipline to build the general capacity of self-governance. As this capacity strengthens, you will find that disciplines which once seemed impossible have become merely difficult, and disciplines which seemed difficult have become natural. You are not the same person who found these disciplines challenging. You have built capacity that the former you did not possess. The first discipline is the hardest. I cannot emphasize this too strongly. Establishing the first discipline requires fighting not only the resistance specific to that activity, but the resistance of an undisciplined character to discipline itself. Once the first discipline is established, subsequent disciplines benefit from the capacity built by their predecessor. I recommend what I call a discipline cascade plan. Identify your entry point discipline, the discipline most accessible to you in your current circumstances. Commit to establishing this discipline fully before adding others. Do not scatter your effort across multiple fronts simultaneously. This builds insufficient depth in any single domain to generate transferable capacity. Once the first discipline is established, once it has reached at least stage 3 of neutral competence, add a second discipline that benefits from the capacity you have built. Once the second is established, add a third. Each addition becomes progressively easier because each builds upon the capacity accumulated by its predecessors. The errors at this stage are predictable. The primary error is attempting too many disciplines simultaneously, thereby building insufficient depth in any single domain. When you try to establish 5 disciplines at once, you build 1/5 the capacity in each, which may be insufficient to trigger the neural reorganization that makes persistence natural. The secondary error is failing to recognize the connections between disciplines, treating each as an isolated burden rather than as part of an integrated system. When you see your morning exercise as connected to your evening study, as mutually reinforcing elements of a single capacity for self-governance, the entire enterprise assumes a different character. The third error is choosing entry points that are too ambitious. If you attempt to establish your most difficult discipline first, you may fail before transferable capacity can develop. Begin where you can succeed and let success build the platform for greater ambition. After absorbing this chapter, you see your disciplines not as isolated burdens, but as interconnected investments in a single expanding capacity. Each small discipline carries significance far beyond its immediate domain. The question shifts from which discipline matters most to how can I build the general capacity that serves all disciplines? This is the kingdom of ordered purpose, the state in which discipline in one area supports discipline in all areas, and the whole becomes greater than the sum of its parts. But you may ask, what is the ultimate prize? What becomes possible for the person who has fully developed this general capacity for self-governance? The next chapter reveals the answer: genuine freedom. We arrive now at a truth that overturns the common understanding of freedom itself. Discipline is not the enemy of liberty, but its foundation. The disciplined man is free. The undisciplined man is enslaved. This may seem a paradox, for the modern mind conceives freedom as the absence of constraint, the ability to do whatever one wishes whenever one wishes to do it. By this definition, the disciplined man, who binds himself to routines and obligations appears less free than the man who follows every impulse without restraint. But I tell you that this conception of freedom is fit only for beasts. It is the freedom of the dog who chases every rabbit, the freedom of the drunkard who surrenders to every thirst, the freedom of the child who has not yet learned that some constraints liberate whilst their absence imprisons. True human freedom, the freedom that elevates and ennobles, is not the absence of external constraint, but the presence of internal capacity. It is the power to govern oneself, to master one's impulses rather than be mastered by them, to choose what one will become rather than be buffeted by circumstance and appetite. Consider two men I knew in Parliament, for they illustrate this principle with perfect clarity. The first possessed that capacity for self-governance which makes all other governance possible. He could keep confidences when discretion was required, honor commitments when convenience counseled abandonment, subordinate personal desire to public duty when the two came into conflict. His appetites were real. He was no cold fish devoid of passion, but his appetites answered to his will rather than commanding it. This man rose to high office, not because he was the most brilliant, others surpassed him in native wit, but because he could be trusted. He could be trusted with secrets, with responsibilities, with the public interest. His self-governance made him capable of the larger governance required of a minister. Doors opened to him that remained forever closed to men of greater brilliance but lesser discipline. The second man possessed gifts that exceeded the first in every natural dimension. His speeches were more eloquent, his insights more profound, his charm more captivating. Had raw talent determined advancement, he would have risen to the highest offices whilst the first remained in obscurity. But he could not govern himself. His brilliant speeches were delivered when he chose to prepare them, which was not always when preparation was required. His profound insights were shared when mood permitted, which was not always when the moment demanded. His captivating charm alternated with periods of neglect that damaged friendships and destroyed alliances. He could not keep commitments. He could not maintain focus. He could not subordinate immediate impulse to long-term interest. This man never rose beyond the back benches. His committees devolved into chaos because he could not sustain attention. His initiatives collapsed because he could not persist through difficulty. His relationships fractured because others learned they could not depend upon him. The doors that opened to his disciplined colleague remained permanently locked, not by external gatekeepers, but by his own incapacity to function within. Here, then, is the distinction between the two freedoms. The first freedom, freedom from constraint, is merely the absence of external coercion. Anyone may possess it. Even the prisoner possesses it in his dreams. The second freedom, freedom for achievement, is the capacity to accomplish what you choose, to become what you intend. Only the second freedom is genuine human freedom, and it requires discipline as its foundation. The man who cannot say no to himself is not free, but enslaved. Consider this carefully. His impulses dictate his actions. He is their servant, not their master. When appetite commands, he obeys. When distraction summons, he follows. When difficulty provokes the impulse to retreat, he retreats. He may imagine himself free because no external authority compels him, but he is governed nonetheless, governed by forces within himself that he has never learned to master. The disciplined man, by contrast, governs himself. When appetite commands what wisdom forbids, he forbids. When distraction summons him from purpose, he remains. When difficulty provokes retreat, he advances. He is free because he has made himself capable of choosing, genuinely choosing, rather than merely following the strongest impulse of the moment. Many of life's greatest opportunities require discipline as the price of entry. The doors to meaningful work, to lasting relationship, to positions of responsibility and trust, these doors open only to those who can demonstrate the capacity for sustained, disciplined engagement. The undisciplined man finds these doors permanently locked, and he may spend his life blaming the gatekeepers without recognizing that the lock lies within himself. Here is the paradox of constraint. The man who constrains himself expands his possibilities. The man who constrains nothing contracts his possibilities. Self-imposed limitation in service of mastery produces far greater range than undisciplined indulgence. The pianist who disciplines herself through years of scales and exercises gains the freedom to play anything. The undisciplined dabbler remains forever imprisoned in the narrow range of what comes easily. The writer who disciplines himself through daily practice gains the freedom to express any thought. The undisciplined scribbler remains forever trapped by his own limitations. The leader who has disciplined his character gains the freedom to function in crisis. The undisciplined man of talent finds that crisis reveals his fundamental incapacity. Examine your own life through this lens. What doors remain closed to you because you lack the disciplined capacity to function within them? What opportunities have passed you by because you could not sustain the effort required to seize them? What achievements remain beyond reach because you cannot govern your impulses sufficiently to pursue them? Recognize that each act of discipline is an act of liberation. You are not constraining yourself when you rise early to work. You are freeing yourself to accomplish what the late riser can never achieve. You are not imprisoning yourself when you maintain focus despite distraction. You are liberating yourself from the prison of scattered attention in which the undisciplined man spends his days. The discipline you build today is the freedom you will enjoy tomorrow. They are not opposites, but aspects of a single process. The resentment that often accompanies discipline dissolves when discipline is understood as liberation rather than imprisonment. Pursue discipline, and you pursue freedom by another name. But a question arises. How does this disciplined freedom affect your relationships with others? The next chapter reveals how self-governance transforms the capacity for love, trust, and lasting connection. There persists a romantic notion that love and discipline are opposites, that the heart must be free to follow its impulses, that authentic feeling cannot be constrained, that discipline represents the cold hand of duty strangling the warm spontaneity of genuine emotion. This is dangerous nonsense, and I have watched it destroy marriages, fracture families, and leave in its wake a trail of broken hearts and shattered trust. The truth is precisely opposite. The disciplined man proves more capable of love, not less. Faithfulness, reliability, the capacity to subordinate immediate impulse to long-term commitment, these qualities, essential to every lasting relationship, are products of disciplined character. The romantic who follows every feeling produces chaos. The disciplined man who keeps his commitments produces trust. I observed two marriages closely through my years in political life, and the contrast between them illuminates this principle with painful clarity. In the first marriage, the husband was a man of considerable feeling. He loved intensely, or believed he did, but he followed every feeling wherever it led. When attraction to another woman arose, he pursued it, believing that authentic emotion must be honored. When his marital commitments became inconvenient, he abandoned them, reasoning that constraint was oppression. He treated faithfulness as imprisonment and infidelity as liberation. His marriage produced continuous chaos. There were scenes, reconciliations, further betrayals, scandals barely contained, and finally a bitterness that poisoned not only husband and wife but children, extended family, and the very capacity of all involved to trust again. He had followed his heart, as the saying goes. His heart led him to destruction. In the second marriage, the husband was equally capable of feeling, perhaps more so, for he was a man of genuine emotional depth. But he governed his feelings in service of his commitments. When attraction to another arose, and it did arise, for he was no marble statue, he acknowledged the feeling without acting upon it. He subordinated momentary attraction to lasting loyalty, not because he felt no temptation, but because he valued his marriage more than he valued the satisfaction of every passing impulse. His marriage produced children who adored him, a wife who trusted him absolutely, and a home that remained stable through decades of political turbulence, public controversy, and the ordinary stresses that strain every union. When crisis came, and crisis always comes, his family stood together because the foundation of trust had never been compromised. The first man had feeling without discipline. The second had feeling governed by discipline. The difference was everything. Here, then, is the foundation upon which all lasting relationship rests: trust. And trust is built through demonstrated reliability over time. You cannot talk your way into being trusted. You cannot charm your way into being trusted. You cannot purchase trust with grand gestures or eloquent declarations. Trust is built brick by brick through countless small acts of faithfulness, through commitments kept when keeping them was inconvenient, through presence maintained when absence would have been easier. Only the disciplined man can be relied upon in this way. The undisciplined man, however passionate his declarations, cannot be trusted with another's heart because he cannot trust himself to honor his own commitments. Love requires promises that extend beyond the feelings of the moment. This is what the Romantics fail to understand. The marriage vow is not a description of present feeling, but a commitment to future action. It says not, "I feel love for you today," but "I will act lovingly toward you tomorrow, and the day after, and through all the days that follow, regardless of how I happen to feel on any particular morning." The man who cannot keep commitments cannot love fully. He may experience the emotion of love, the warmth, the attraction, the desire for another's presence, but he cannot translate that emotion into the sustained action that love requires. He loves only when loving is easy, which is to say, he does not love at all in any sense that matters. For love that evaporates when difficulty arrives is not love, but mere preference. The disciplined man can feel without being controlled by feeling. This is the crucial capacity. He can experience attraction without acting upon every attraction. He can feel the pull toward momentary pleasure without surrendering to it. He can honor long-term commitment through short-term difficulty because his feelings answer to his values rather than his values answering to his feelings. This governance does not diminish emotional depth. Rather, it channels emotion into productive expression. The disciplined husband who remains faithful through temptation does not love less than the undisciplined husband who strays. He loves more because his love has been tested and proven genuine. His love is not merely a fair-weather feeling, but an all-weather commitment. The disciplined person offers a gift of immeasurable value to those who depend upon them: stability. Children need to know that their parents will be present, will keep their word, will provide the secure foundation from which exploration becomes possible. Spouses need to know that their partner will honor the covenant they have made, that trust can be placed without fear of betrayal, that the relationship rests upon rock rather than sand. This stability is not coldness. It is the warmth of reliability, the comfort of knowing that commitment will be honored regardless of mood. The child who knows his father will attend his performance does not experience that certainty as coldness. He experiences it as love made tangible. The wife who knows her husband will remain faithful does not experience that certainty as constraint. She experiences it as the foundation of her security and joy. Examine your relationships through this lens. Where has your undisciplined behavior damaged trust? Where has your reliability strengthened bonds? Recognize that every act of disciplined commitment is an investment in the foundation of love. When you feel the pull toward unreliable behavior, when you are tempted to break a promise, neglect an obligation, pursue a momentary pleasure at the cost of lasting commitment, recognize this as a choice between momentary indulgence and lasting connection. One or the other. You cannot have both. Choose connection. Choose discipline. Choose love. The next chapter reveals what becomes possible for those who have integrated these teachings fully, the state of the sovereign self in which discipline and desire have become indistinguishable. We arrive at last at the ultimate destination of the disciplined journey, the state in which the distinction between duty and desire dissolves entirely. At this stage, the master does not choose between what he ought to do and what he wishes to do, for these have become identical. His wish is his duty. His duty is his wish. The internal conflict that characterized earlier stages of the journey, the constant struggle between what you want and what you should, has been resolved not through the suppression of desire, but through its transformation. For the person who has traveled far enough along this path, discipline ceases to feel like discipline. Wanting and oughting have merged into a single movement of the soul. I did not understand this state in my youth. Indeed, I did not believe it possible. Duty seemed always to be what one must do despite one's inclinations. The very essence of duty appeared to be its opposition to desire. How could they possibly become one? But by the time of my second premiership, when I had accumulated decades of disciplined practice across multiple domains, I discovered the truth of what had previously seemed merely philosophical abstraction. I no longer experienced the demands of office as burdens to be borne, rising at dawn to address the day's challenges, working through papers until the small hours, enduring the physical strain of constant travel and endless meetings, navigating the treacherous currents of alliance politics whilst prosecuting a global war. These were not duties I forced myself to perform. They were activities I genuinely wished to undertake. The transformation was complete. What had once required willpower now required no will at all, for my desires had been shaped by decades of discipline to align perfectly with my responsibilities. I did not have to make myself serve. I wanted to serve. I did not have to force myself to work. I wanted to work. Duty and desire had become one. At this level of integration, the will that forces action and the wish that desires action are no longer separate forces. The internal argument has been settled. One voice speaks where previously there was cacophony. The master does not override his desires. His desires have been educated to want what is good. The competing impulses that created the need for self-coercion have been integrated or dissolved. This is not the resolution of a conflict, but the discovery that the conflict was always based upon a misunderstanding. Duty and desire were never truly opposed. They merely appeared opposed because desire had not yet been trained to want what duty required. Consider what this means practically. The master works tremendously hard by any external measure, but the work does not feel hard. What appears from outside as tremendous effort is experienced from inside as natural expression. He accomplishes in a day what others cannot accomplish in a week, yet he feels no strain, no resentment, no sense of sacrifice. This explains why accomplished men often seem genuinely puzzled when praised for their discipline. To them, they are simply doing what they want. The outside observer sees a man rising at 5, working until midnight, maintaining focus through distractions that would scatter lesser minds. The man himself sees only the natural expression of his formed character. He is not disciplining himself. He is being himself. At this stage, what you do and who you are have become indistinguishable. Identity and action have merged completely. The question, "What should I do?" is answered automatically by, "What am I?" because being and doing have become unified. The disciplined man does not perform discipline. He is discipline manifesting in action. Here is the paradox that makes this state so difficult to describe to those who have not experienced it. The master acts with what might be called spontaneous discipline. His action is both completely free and completely aligned with purpose. He acts without hesitation not because he has not thought, but because his thinking and wanting have merged. Deliberation occurs instantly because the values are so deeply integrated that they no longer require conscious consultation. You may not yet have reached this state, few have, but you can move toward it by recognizing and celebrating moments when duty and desire align. Notice when you find yourself wanting to do what you have decided to do. These moments are not accidents. They are evidence of the transformation in progress. Such moments occur more frequently as discipline deepens. At first, they are rare, flashes of alignment in an otherwise conflicted experience. Gradually, they become more common. Eventually, they become the rule rather than the exception. And finally, they become so constant that their opposite, the conflict between duty and desire, becomes difficult to remember. Increase the frequency of these moments by remaining faithful to your disciplines long enough for desire to catch up with duty. Each day of faithfulness teaches your desires new lessons about what to want. Each act of discipline shapes the neurological architecture of desire itself. Review your current disciplines and identify any where you have begun to experience genuine desire for what was originally only duty. Perhaps your morning exercise has begun to feel like pleasure rather than obligation. Perhaps your evening study has begun to feel like privilege rather than burden. Celebrate this evidence of transformation. It shows that the process works, that duty genuinely does transform into desire when faithfulness is maintained. For disciplines where the gap remains, where duty and desire still stand opposed, recommit with the understanding that continued faithfulness will eventually produce the same merger you have begun to experience elsewhere. The mechanics are identical, only the timeline varies. The error at this advanced stage is believing the journey complete when integration remains only partial. Even frequent moments of unified will and wish do not indicate permanent arrival. The merger must extend to more situations, deeper challenges, longer durations. The work of integration continues even at the highest levels of mastery. But know this, the destination is real. It is not abstract philosophy, but achievable state. The internal conflict you currently experience is not permanent but developmental, a stage to be traversed on the way to unity. The promise of discipline is revealed at last, not merely accomplishment, but the achievement of internal harmony. The undisciplined man is the creature of his circumstances. When conditions favor him, he rises. When conditions oppose him, he falls. His equilibrium depends upon the world arranging itself according to his preferences, a dependency that guarantees eventual disappointment, for the world cares nothing for any man's preferences. The master has made himself substantially independent of circumstance. This does not mean he does not prefer favorable conditions. He is human, not stone. It means his well-being, his capacity to function, his fundamental satisfaction with existence do not depend upon external conditions. He has learned to find satisfaction in the quality of his own engagement rather than in outcomes he cannot control. This is not stoic detachment, the cold indifference to what happens that some philosophies recommend. It is genuine freedom, the capacity to maintain purpose and satisfaction regardless of what the world brings. I discovered this state during the darkest days of May 1940. France was falling. The British Expeditionary Force was trapped at Dunkirk. The German armies appeared invincible, their blitzkrieg smashing through defenses that were supposed to hold for months. Invasion of our island seemed not merely possible, but probable. The calculations of rational assessment suggested that we faced defeat and subjugation. I was required to function at the highest level despite circumstances that would have overwhelmed a man dependent upon favorable conditions for his equilibrium. The decisions demanded of me in those weeks would determine the fate of civilization. There was no margin for error, no possibility of retreat, no source of comfort in external circumstance. And I found, somewhat to my own surprise, that my capacity to work, to think, to lead, to inspire, was not diminished by the catastrophic situation. If anything, it increased. The worse things became, the more fully my capabilities were called forth. The gravity of circumstance did not crush me, it concentrated me. I slept less, worked more, thought more clearly, spoke more powerfully than I had ever done in times of ease. The explanation is not mysterious. I had built, through decades of discipline, a citadel within that circumstances could not breach. My functioning depended not upon external conditions, but upon internal resources that remained accessible regardless of what occurred outside. Here, then, is the principle. The master finds satisfaction not in outcomes, which are partly beyond control, but in the quality of his own engagement, which is fully within control. This shift of focus, from what happens to how you respond, produces stability that external circumstances cannot shake. When your satisfaction derives from the quality of your effort, from the fullness of your engagement, from the faithful execution of your duty regardless of result, then no external reversal can deprive you of the grounds of your satisfaction. Consider the difference between two questions. The first question is, what is happening to me? A question that makes you a passive recipient of circumstance, rising and falling with events you do not control. The second question is, what am I contributing? A question that makes you an active agent regardless of circumstance, focused on what lies within your power rather than what lies outside it. The master asks the second question. He focuses on contribution rather than receipt, on engagement rather than outcome, on the quality of his own action rather than the cooperation of the world. This produces a remarkable effect in adversity. For the master, adversity becomes opportunity for the display of capacity. Difficulties that would paralyze the circumstance-dependent become occasions for the exercise of disciplined response. The worse things become, the more fully the master's capabilities are called forth, the more completely he demonstrates what he is made of. I do not pretend that this state is easily achieved. It is the fruit of long cultivation, not a trick to be learned quickly. The citadel within is built brick by brick, discipline by discipline, over years and decades. Each act of disciplined response to difficulty adds another stone to the fortress. Each exercise of self-governance in the face of impulse strengthens the walls. But once built, this citadel provides a security that no external circumstance can match. The man of wealth may lose his fortune, the man of power may lose his office, the man of reputation may lose his good name. But the man who has built his satisfaction upon the quality of his own engagement can lose nothing that matters, for what matters is entirely within himself. Begin shifting your satisfaction from outcomes to engagement. This is practical counsel you can apply today. When you complete a day's discipline, locate your satisfaction not in any result achieved, but in the quality of your effort itself. Ask yourself, did I engage fully? Did I bring my best? Did I contribute what I am capable of contributing? These questions have answers that depend upon you alone. No circumstance can prevent you from engaging fully. No adversity can prevent you from bringing your best. Build your daily sense of accomplishment upon answers to these questions rather than upon circumstances you do not control. For 1 week, I counsel you to end each day by answering 3 questions. Did I engage with my disciplines today? Did I bring quality attention to my activities? Did I contribute what I am capable of contributing? Derive your sense of satisfaction from these answers rather than from external results. Observe how this shift affects your stability across varying circumstances. You will find that good days and bad days, as measured by external events, begin to matter less. What matters is whether you showed up, whether you engaged, whether you brought yourself fully to the arena. The primary error is confusing circumstance independence with outcome indifference. The master cares about outcomes. He works mightily to achieve them. He simply does not base his well-being upon them. He acts with full commitment to results whilst maintaining his equilibrium regardless of results. The citadel within permits engagement with the world without enslavement to the world. It is freedom achieved through discipline, freedom that no circumstance can revoke. We arrive at the final chapter, and with it, the ultimate meaning of the disciplined life. It is not merely personal achievement. It is not merely the satisfaction of accomplishment, the freedom of self-governance, the harmony of integrated desire. These are precious goods, but they are not the highest goods that discipline offers. The highest good is this: contribution to the civilizational inheritance that makes human flourishing possible across generations. The master recognizes that he has received a legacy, the accumulated wisdom, example, and effort of those who came before. Everything he knows about discipline, about character, about the proper conduct of a human life he has received from others: parents, teachers, mentors, authors dead for centuries, whose books yet speak. He did not invent these truths. He inherited them. And he accepts responsibility to transmit this legacy, enriched by his own experience, to those who follow. When I reflect upon my own development, I recognize debts that can never be repaid except by passing their value forward. The officer who first taught me the discipline of military service, who insisted upon excellence when mediocrity would have been tolerated, who demanded more of me than I believed I possessed, gave me something I could never return to him. The tutors who introduced me to Gibbon and Macaulay, who opened the treasury of English literature and invited me to take what I could carry, they gave gifts beyond any repayment. The statesmen whose example I observed, sometimes from close proximity in the House of Commons, sometimes from the distance of historical record, Lloyd George demonstrating the power of oratory, Gladstone showing what sustained moral conviction could accomplish, my own father revealing both the heights of political ambition and the depths of its cost. These men taught me through their example whether they intended to or not. I cannot repay these debts directly. The men who taught me are dead. The authors who shaped me are beyond communication. But I can transmit what they gave. My books, my speeches, my example in crisis, these are not vanities, but debts repaid. They pass forward what was passed to me. Every disciplined man participates in this chain of transmission, whether he knows it or not. Your example teaches those who observe you. Your character influences those who depend upon you. Your demonstrated capacity for self-governance shows others what is possible, and thereby expands their conception of their own possibilities. The most powerful teaching occurs through example rather than exhortation. Words may inform, but example transforms. The young officer who witnesses his colonel maintaining composure under fire learns something that no lecture could convey. The child who sees her father rise each morning to pursue his work regardless of mood absorbs lessons that no sermon could instill. Your lived demonstration of disciplined capability teaches more than your words ever could. Others are watching, whether you know it or not. Your niece, your colleague's son, the young man who passes you each morning as you take your constitutional, these witnesses draw conclusions from your conduct that shape their own aspirations. You cannot control what conclusions they draw, but you can control the evidence you provide. A life of disciplined excellence provides evidence that discipline is possible, that it produces good fruit, that it is worth the effort it requires. A life of undisciplined mediocrity provides evidence of the opposite sort. This is responsibility. It is also privilege. The civilization we inhabit depends upon sufficient numbers of disciplined individuals. It requires people who can defer gratification in service of long-term good, who can honor commitments when keeping them is costly, who can produce more than they consume, who can govern themselves without external coercion. When discipline declines in a civilization, that civilization declines. The capacity for self-governance that makes free institutions possible erodes. The reliability that makes complex cooperation possible diminishes. The excellence that produces beauty and truth and progress becomes rare. Your discipline is not merely personal accomplishment. It is civilizational contribution. Each disciplined citizen strengthens the fabric of society. Each undisciplined citizen weakens it. You are not an isolated atom pursuing private goods. You are a participant in an ongoing project of human development that extends far beyond your individual lifespan. Consider now the practical application of this understanding. Identify one person whose example has contributed to your own discipline. Perhaps a parent who modeled reliability. Perhaps a teacher who demanded excellence. Perhaps a mentor who showed you what was possible. Write briefly what you received from this person, acknowledging the debt. Then identify one person who might receive similar benefit from your example. A child, a younger colleague, a friend who struggles with self-governance. Consider how you might consciously offer the same gift you received, not through lectures or sermons, but through visible, consistent example. This exercise connects you to the chain of transmission in which you now participate. You are not merely a recipient of the legacy. You are becoming a transmitter of it. The discipline you have built is not yours alone. It belongs to the future as well as the present. We have traveled far together through these pages. We began with the paradox that governs human happiness, the discovery that effort produces satisfaction whilst ease produces emptiness. We examined the mechanisms that make transformation possible, the brain that builds itself through use, the action that precedes feeling, the behavior that shapes identity. We mapped the journey from resistance to mastery, identifying the stages, the dangers, the errors to avoid. We explored the transfer of disciplined capacity across domains and the freedom that only discipline can purchase. We saw how discipline transforms relationship and how, at the highest levels, duty and desire merge into unified action. We built the citadel within that circumstances cannot breach, and now we stand at the end, recognizing that the end is also a beginning. The journey of understanding these pages have offered you is complete. The journey of living what you have understood has just begun. Every morning you face a choice. You can obey the voice that counsels ease, that promises pleasure in the avoidance of effort, that whispers seductively of tomorrow, or you can rise and work and build. The pleasure you seek lies not behind you, but ahead, on the far side of discipline, waiting to be claimed by those who have earned the right to possess it. Never give in. Never give in. Never, 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 in nothing, great or small, large or petty, never give in except to convictions of honor and good sense. The reward for this steadfastness is not mere accomplishment, though accomplishment shall certainly be yours. The reward is the transformation of the self, the discovery that you are capable of far more than you imagined, and the deep and abiding pleasure that comes from living as a disciplined man in an undisciplined world.